who is our favorite rookie landing spot? That and more this week on the couch, joined by Rich Hribar. You know him from Sharp Football Analysis. A lot to absorb, Rich. But who's the rookie, the spot that stands out to you as we look over the draft?
Yeah, I think this is multifaceted, but I will end on my favorite, in typical, on brand fashion. I'm going to give you like a
Mm-hmm.
multiple answer. But I mean, I definitely still think that the best landing spot was we had the pie in the sky outcome for Ashton Jeanty. Like, don't overthink it. Like, this was it. Ashton Jeanty going 6 overall to a Pete Carroll, Chip Kelly offense. You just lock it in. I think RJ Harvey was the landing spot that increased his draft stock the most from pre draft to post draft. And then my favorite landing spot is a pair of guys that went to the same team. It's Travis Hunter and Bashal Tutin to the Jaguars. Those are those like in unison, just what they were able to grab into their offense. Because you saw Liam Cohen, everything he's talked about since he's been in the building in Jacksonville is creating explosive plays. He wants to create explosive plays. There's an offense that they added Brian Thomas Jr. last year, and we saw him kind of manifest into that true alpha archetype that you would love to have as your wide receiver one. Everything else kind of deteriorated around him in that passing game as the season went on. You trade Christian Kirk after they said they were going to release him. They have to release Evan Ingram. So where are we going to get some added pieces in this offense? Travis Etienne basically has 1 foot out the door. So we add Travis Hunter, in who they told us he's now going to play wide receiver primarily. We're going to see him play
Mm-hmm.
defensive back too, but we know for sure based on landing spot and everything they've said afterwards, he's going to be playing wide receiver, and he's not going to be asked to carry the passing game because you did that last year when you added a true, alpha receiver in Brian Thomas Jr. Travis Hunter can come in this Liam Cohen offense. We already know he can get quick hitters and create after the catch, and we know he can win downfield. So that's like a huge add. And then Bashal too, and being able to come in. I think even the long picture, if ETN is only a one and done here in the system, the ramp forward here, even if we don't have a big fantasy run out for two in 2025, his style of football, I think, is really simpatico with Tank Bigsby as well. So I think that the marriage is going to work really well. And obviously, the Jaguars get rid of Trent Baalke, another
Mm.
big positive addition by subtraction. But I like everything that the Jaguars did in this initial kind of runway here. And in terms of still trying to see what they have with Trevor Lawrence. I mean, this is a team that's like really committed to Trevor Lawrence. I mean, he got the huge contract extension before last year. The small sample we had last year was still not good. We haven't seen him kind of get over that hump. And is all this marriage of things going to be what finally gets it? We hope so.
Right? The two quarterbacks I think that applies to. Now, I mean, Caleb Williams isn't as far along in his career curve, but both Caleb Williams and Trevor Lawrence, the new regimes, extremely aggressive in building an offense around them that reflects their philosophy. And we'll see how well these quarterbacks can plug into that. But let's step through each one of these. You mentioned Ashton GT. I mean, before the draft, Rich, I was saying trade up to number one. You don't have to tell me what the package is. Like 3 first-round picks, I don't care. Trade up to number one. And like you said, at landing in Las Vegas with Pete Carroll, with Chip Kelly, with Geno Smith, by the way. Don't be surprised if Geno Smith gets back into our fantasy good graces with everything he has around him. Another really underrated thing I want to mention about Gene T in the draft, by the way, Jack Besh, excellent blocking receiver. Dante Thornton, excellent blocking receiver. Like both of those guys get after it. And that can be the difference between a 20-yard run and a 60, 70-yard touchdown. So let me put it to you this way, Rich. When we narrow it down to best ball redraft, are you willing to go Ashton Jeanty in the top 5? Are you willing to take him maybe even ahead of Bijan Robinson? Or would you go maybe ahead of Justin Jefferson with Jeanty? You're that excited? Is number one overall fantasy player, period, most valuable fantasy player this year? Is that in his range of outcomes?
I think it's definitely in the range of outcomes. It's just a tick lower of like when Ezekiel Elliott landed in Dallas to me, just because Dallas, the infrastructure of that Dallas offensive line was just such a positive when Zeke landed there. You had those three anchors in their prime. You had Frederick, Zach Martin, and Tyron Smith, like all like right in the heart. Like it all got to go. And remember, Zeke, the first 3 years of his career, led the NFL in rushing every year in yards per game. It's like a tick below that just because, the system is great. I wish the offensive line was just a
Mhm.
little bit better. And I know that they had some younger players like, Jackson Power Johnson, who drafted in the second round. He made 14 starts last year, and he played a little bit of every left guard and center as a rookie. They got some guys like DJ Glaze in the third round who they got production out of these guys, but like, are these guys? They're not Zach
Mhm.
Martin and
Mhm.
Travis Frederick either. So just a tick below, but we do love the Pete Carroll, Chip Kelly marriage paired with what you said, getting Geno Smith to keep this offense on track. I mean, this was a roster that had bottom rung quarterback play last year. You add a guy like Jack Besh, they had Brock Bowers last year. They get a big home run guy with Dante Thornton. We'll see if Trey Tucker has a bounce back year. He's a little bit disappointing in his run out last year. Could have been quarterback play
Mhm.
induced though
Mhm.
too. We'll see what happens. He has more meat on the bone here, but this is a guy in Janty who's going to come in, and it's just like really hard to not see him without an injury really push like 350 touches, right? And those
Mhm.
guys don't
No.
grow on trees anymore in fantasy football. And if you just take that type of value and pair it with talent, and you say, hey, why can't he have a big ceiling apex range of
Yeah,
outcomes?
it's a fun pick. If anyone goes in and say, I drew number 4, I drew number 5, and number 6 in my draft, and I'm building my team around Genty, like in your most important league, your home league, your big money league, your pride league, it's fun. It'd be fun to buy a ticket for that train. And again, I see Rich emerging as sort of a starting default for your drafts. We keep mentioning these teams. The Raiders, we'll talk about the Bears a little bit more, I'm sure. And then, well, let's get to Jacksonville. Like one of these 3 teams, if not all 3, should be part of your draft plan. And I've said this on almost every show I've done lately, Rich. Like at this point in the offseason, I'm just looking at which offenses can take the biggest step forward from last year, which is depressing player values across the offense. And
Mhm.
oftentimes, if you can just pick that offense, you don't even necessarily have to be right about exactly which players. Just do a shotgun approach and scatter shot. Um, the pies could get a lot bigger, and also the pecking order because of new coaches, because of new schemes, the pecking order of players can change really quickly. And you bring up Jacksonville, this is just really exciting because Liam Cohen is basically the reason that Will Levis got drafted in the first place. And the team thought maybe he could become something. Liam Cohen with the Rams develops that relationship with Baker Mayfield, helps turn Baker Mayfield's career around, then increases that, helps Baker Mayfield get to an even higher level. And for fantasy football in a way that we love, right? I mean, if you just look at the Bucks offense last year, it's just a fantasy dream, including, I just want to go back to what you said about Bashal Tutin, including Bucky Irvin by like week
Yeah.
12 did take over, and Liam Cohen wasn't as direct as he was about Bucky Irving. Again, sometimes Coach Speak Index, I'm going to be having him on soon, and Greg Branos, and I'll be on a show with him too. But I'm so glad that he's done the job he's done really highlighting the importance of coach speak because it was right there. Liam Cohen said after the draft, Bucky Irving runs the ball. I want running backs to run the ball in my offense. And you have to assume that's true about Bashal too.
And they took him over Ray
Yeah,
Davis in that draft, who he had,
right.
you
He
know.
was intimately familiar with, right? So Bashal Tutin, we'll see about Travis Etienne. In some ways, Bashal Tutin is what Bashal Tutin could be what Travis Etienne was advertised to be. And that big acceleration, speed, contact balance, big play guy. Um, and so I think that Bashal Tutin still has that potential Bucky Irving role, but I want to go to touch on specifically Travis Hunter because, Rich, I think people are still underestimating him. I mean, I think that when we look at the names that we could be including him with, it is Jamar Chase, it is Justin Jefferson, um, and that's with Brian Thomas being Brian Thomas. The key link being Trevor Lawrence. You mentioned that. You set it up and you said, like, well, we'll see. Let's see about this marriage of Trevor Lawrence. What's our best guess? I think that the riddles, Trevor Lawrence and Caleb Williams, what do you think about these quarterbacks? Was it the structure around them, or is it maybe they're not that good just because you go number 1 overall? We see like Brock
Yeah.
Purdy. We're underestimating quarterbacks that go late, but maybe also if you're a number 1 overall, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be good. Let's start with Trevor Lawrence. Are you more likely to bet on him or say I'll let somebody else buy into the Jags offense and the improvement this year?
I think where he is opened in like these early drafts, I definitely think there's still value to be plucked. I think that's a very flat quarterback landscape. What is the real big difference between Trevor Lawrence versus a Drake May, a Bo Nix, right? Like in the fantasy sense, it's not that wide. But would I like Drake May or Bo Nix more than him? Probably, but I can also get a pretty good player at that ADP, and then maybe I have an arbitrage play
Yeah.
in him. Guys like you brought up Baker Mayfield, like he goes considerably after him. Like he still has that range of outcomes where he can be a viable QB2 because he has a little bit of mobility and he's going to give you a sprinkling of rushing production and rushing touchdowns. And then if the passing, just kind of congeals into an area where we believe it's palpable, he can have one of those seasons. It's like a back end QB1, or maybe even luckier if you get that type of really elite passing touchdown production where Baker runs hot and throws almost
Hmm.
40 touchdowns, or like Goff has done in recent years. That's where you need to crack that ceiling, is the overall passing touchdowns. That's probably harder to project, but I definitely believe he belongs in that still bucket of passers. I do have a little more confidence in Trevor Lawrence as a prospect because I still think he wins in structure a lot
Hmm.
more than Caleb Williams does. And I just think we're in an era of the NFL where you have to win in structure right now. And that's, I think, where we've seen some of the struggles of this transition now, where the NFL is always, it's always evolving. It's a cat and mouse game. Like these types of coverages and shell coverages and match coverage and two high safeties, like these aren't things that just were introduced to the NFL and people are like, oh, this new thing happened. It's just, the evolution of getting back to it, because these quarterbacks that play, I think, where Caleb Williams' strengths are. And I mean, you go back to that Vikings game. I think it was the Vikings game last year where he had just an insane play to DeAndre Swift, breaking out of the pocket, throws just like a dime to DeAndre Swift on it's like a 40 or 50-yard gain. And that's where you're like, oh yeah, he can make those plays. Like no one else can do those, but it's the in structure, it's the easy plays that we're starting to see. Like the NFL's, you have to win in that capacity right now, because that's what defenses are giving you. That's why we've seen things shift where guys like the Alpha X receiver has not become like the fantasy star of like yesteryear, like
Hmm.
it was when we were playing, now it's the Amon-Ra St. Browns, it's the Cooper Kupps, it's the Michael Thomases, it's like the guys that the CD Lambs, right? Like these guys that can do everything. They can get the free squares. You even seen it with Jamar Chase last year after Tyler Boyd left. He played in the slot, 30% of his snaps. He's getting you quick hitters near the line of scrimmage because you need that marriage. The NFL defenses want to give you that stuff. And that's the stuff that like Caleb Williams still struggles at, where I still think Trevor Lawrence does those things like largely at a better capacity right now. So I'm a little more confident with that marriage with Liam Cohen. Whereas we're getting a lot of Ben Johnson priced into this Bears offense
Hmm.
right now. We just are. Like it is. And could it be like a Mike McDaniel situation where like year one it absolutely hits and he rejuvenates all these guys and it's a smash? It absolutely could, but like we've got a lot to diagnose in the Bears offense as well. We've got now Colston Loveland and Luther Burden joining. Could Rome Odunze bounce back? Could DJ Moore, is he going to be engaged with this offense
Hmm.
in 2025 as opposed to what he was last year? There's all these moving parts with the Bears that just go beyond Ben Johnson. That's what makes it hard for me to just say like, all right, I'm all in on the Bears. It's a lot easier for me to look at the Jaguars and say it's cleaner,
Yeah.
is what I should
Yeah.
say. It's
Yeah.
just it's cleaner to tell myself the story.
Yeah, well, it is, and I mean, let's again, a theme just kind of emerging of the show, talking about the Jags, talking about the Raiders, talking about the Bears, talking about potential most improved offense of 2025, which is crucial in fantasy football to be out ahead of that. And I think part of the reason it's cleaner, like you said, it's just experience. It's just the experience that Trevor Lawrence has and what we've seen that Trevor Lawrence can do. And for that matter, with the Raiders, also it's the experience of Geno Smith. With Geno Smith, Rich, I think we're going to say solve for X, X being how bad was the Seattle situation for him in terms of offensive line, in terms of what he had to work with. And we may see like 4 games, 5 games into the season watching the
And
Raiders.
Ryan Grubb.
Yeah, right. We
I mean, we knew the Seattle deficiencies as the season was unfolding before our eyes, and Ryan Grubb just did nothing to
yeah,
calibrate around those deficiencies, and that's why, unfortunately, he was a one and done. But also, he's not in the Ben Johnson category. But it's like you have to always pump your brakes too, still, and say like, not every offensive coordinator change is going to be a good one.
right. Well, and because, and again, I think this is a great expansive topic when we talk about coordinators
Mhm.
or why some coordinators fail. in some situations succeed, like fail in the pros, but succeed in college, or succeed as coordinators, but fail as head coaches. And I do think that at least over the years, we've seen the smarter coordinators, the ones who hopefully whose DNA is being replicated in the coaching trees, Rich, understand that it isn't about, well, you hired me to do this scheme and I'm going to stick with this scheme and I'm going to get players that fit in this scheme. We're going to cycle through the roster. And because you can't stand still in the NFL, you can't just keep running it back what you did the year before. You're going backwards if you're doing that. Like Chip Kelly, again, Raiders. I didn't even mean for this to be about Chip Kelly. But Chip Kelly, whatever you remember about him the last time he was in the NFL, he's changed. He's learned.
Hmm.
He's added a lot to his bag of tricks. And again, I think the symmetry here is kind of hilarious that he came to the NFL to spread college offenses, and then he went back to college to learn NFL offenses. And what we have is a Chip Kelly like 3.0 now, and that's going to be really fun for the Raiders. And it's probably going to be more fun, at least at the beginning of the year, for Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence. And like what you said, he's shown that he can get all the low hanging fruit, that he can get the free squares, and that pendulum effect of the NFL. We're back to running backs. Look at the running backs who went early this year. Caleb Johnson and Amari Hampton and Quinton Judkins, three of the
Marlon
five, are
Hampton,
just
yeah.
power backs, like smashers. And so it's interesting to watch that pendulum effect, to where I think somebody put a chart out of like 20 plus yard pass plays or 40-yard pass plays, and how it's just been going down, down, down. And that's by design, right? That's like Vic Fangio. That's like taking away what Patrick
Hmm.
Mahomes does, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So then you swing back and you say, okay, we always want to be a year or two ahead, just like in fantasy football, right? If you're drafting based on how the position value dispersal was based on last year, then you're behind. You should be looking ahead and not behind. But we do have to look back, Rich, to take some stances. So let's drill down on Caleb one more time. I agree with you, but really, you mentioned Drake May in the show already. Um, Drake May. So if the theory for Caleb Williams is, well, his environment was just so bad that all of his erratic play, you should just really chalk up to that. I mean, Ben Johnson picked the job. That must be what he thinks or what he hopes. Drake May was in an equally terrible environment, and you saw why Drake May was the number 3 pick. You saw these glimmers of hope. Does that just mean that maybe we're underestimating Drake May? Maybe the New England Patriots with the McDaniels offense, should they be included as an offense that could take a big leap forward this year?
Absolutely. I brought this up with, Matt Harmon on a show I did last week, that the Patriots have been one of the teams that, from a price point stance, I've been gravitating the most towards, like getting players in these early ADPs. I think we'll see some climbing, but overall, like no one's going to like super spike. But I mean, Drake May in his full games played last year already was the QB7 in points scored per game. From an expected point stance, he was QB10, which is right on par with like kind of my initial projections for him. He's going right around QB 14, so there's a little bit of value there. But I also think that doesn't even price in the what we don't know, the other outcome angle. I mean, one, he was the youngest quarterback in the draft last year, but you brought up the other things. They get Josh McDaniels as a play caller, and I know Josh McDaniels has been like was a donkey head coach at multiple stops, but there's a reason he kept getting a chance to be a head coach, and it's because he can still call offense. And I go back to like that last stint he had at the Raiders, that last full year with the Raiders, that team punched way above its weight class. That last year with the ghost of Cam Newton in New England, punched way above its weight class. And now you add just explosive playmaker in Travion Henderson. You get a reliable player in Stephon Diggs, who was not washed. We'll see. There's injury element still priced into Stephon Diggs. That's an unknown at his age. So it could be an abrupt end for Stephon Diggs. We hope it's not, but he played really well before his injury last year, especially when Nico Collins was injured at the front of last year. We saw him. It wasn't just the opening role where he was just winning in the slot next to these other two good wide receivers. Nico Collins and Tank Dell got hurt, and the offense had to go through Stephon Diggs, and he played really good football. And then they also drafted one of my favorite players in Kyle Williams,
Yes.
who I'm excited about as well. So we've got just a lot that's added here. Oh, and we didn't even talk about the offensive line additions too. Obviously, the names that they added aren't like significant. Like they're not adding like necessarily Hall of Fame caliber players, but getting a Morgan Moses, getting a first round tackle, getting Garrett Bradbury, like these are upgrades of what this team put on the field at offensive line last year. Like this offensive line was absolutely just decimated the entire year last year, and he was dealing with that as well, right? So it's like all these things that are all pros. Like I don't see one thing that's been a negative from this offseason, for Drake May. And you get that rushing still too. I keep going back to Bo Nix, and it's not because I dislike Bo Nix. It's kind of my Jaden Reed. He's my Jaden Reed of this year. So I really love Jaden Reed as a prospect. And last year, his just fantasy ADP made no sense because of how he scored his fantasy points. And that guy this year is Bo Nix opening. Like Bo Nix's ADP just doesn't make any sense to me to the other quarterbacks. And it's like I keep looking at Drake May and Bo Nix, and I'm like, what's the difference? Why is this one guy so much cheaper? And it's not any fault
Mhm.
of Bo Nix. It's just like he's the guy that's there this year. So that's twice I know I brought him up. And it's just that he's kind of like the poster child of like, hey, I feel like I'm arbitraging Bo Nix pretty consistently after him.
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point. I like writing that article every year, a couple of times a year, like ADPs that don't make sense or players when you look at them. I've been starting to put together my tiers for redraft, Rich, and there are just some players. Like I was looking at tight ends this morning, right? And um, in the underdog right now, Brock Bowers and Trey McBride are second round picks, and George Kittle is a fifth round pick. And George Kittle
Yeah.
he outscored them last year. George Kittle outscored them. Um, and I get it. He's going to be 31, 30. He's 31. He's going to be 32, something like that. But there's no sign of a drop off coming. So, I mean, these are the cornerstones of draft strategy. This is basically how your draft strategy should grow up out of the ground organically. Is you scan the ADPs and you think that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. And then you start to see where they're clustered. Like, oh, I see like five Drake May and Trevor Lawrence and Cam Ward. It's funny too, by the way, as an aside, with the whole discussion you said about the NFL is adjusted so that plays outside of structure aren't necessarily as valuable. It's more important to get those layups. This is what's going on with Anthony Richardson right now. And Cam Ward is definitely the
Yeah.
kind of quarterback prospect. I mean, Cam Ward, I don't want to say it's going to follow the same path as Anthony Richardson, but absolutely, what does Cam Ward do well outside of structure? What is it Cam Ward needs to work on? Being in sync, in tune with a scheme, and taking the things that are there via structure. So we'll see what Brian Callahan and company do with him in Tennessee. But the point is, I branched off on that because Cam Ward's going to have some fantasy potential this year as a
Yeah,
rookie for
that's
sure.
another team that
So
I think
you say, well,
is telling us they want to
go
run the
ahead.
football. Yep.
Yeah,
Oh,
the
I said that's
Titans.
another team I think when you look at the surface, even though they take a quarterback one overall, like their signal of everything that they've done this offseason is like they're gonna run the football a lot more than anyone thinks.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that's how you protect a rookie quarterback. I mean, it's like the Vikings too.
Yeah.
Trading for Jordan Mason, signing the two Colts linemen, taking another guy like a road grader in the first round, Donovan Jackson. So I think you're right. I mean, I think one of the fun things about the draft, we get caught up on specific landing spots and where players went, which round they went, and who took who over who. But really, like you said, if you step back and don't get too caught up on the individual selections, the teams are telling us, I love to say, teams can't lie in the draft. They're showing you what's important, what matters when it comes to winning, what matters. You're learning about what they think of their roster or what direction they want the team to go, especially with some of these new regimes. But you mentioned Tennessee, so that's going to be a good jumping off point, right? Because one of the other things I'm kind of obsessed with right now as I'm sorting through everything, Rich, is I feel like I know there was all this hype about the rookie class, the rookie running back class. Maybe we're guilty of this, Rich. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to say you specifically. I'm always about hype and positivity and hyperbole, you know. But we heard so much about how great this rookie running back class is, and then we watched them go off the board, kind of pretty much like a somewhat typical running back class for the first 2 days. Then we saw a ton of guys go in the fourth round. And again, Bashal Tutin is there as our potential Bucky Irving this year, right? Like you said, RJ Harvey. Okay, there's your guy that went earlier than anyone expected, although Jacksonville was in on him. Jacksonville might have taken him in the third round if Denver hadn't. So there's your endorsement for RJ Harvey.
And so, supposedly the Rams were in on him
Oh, wow.
too, and then they're kind of the reason that they kind of just felt like they didn't want to get to Denver's but thing was the pass protection stuff that they valued, but they were supposedly like they had him earmarked
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. And they end up taking Jarquez Hunter. So the fact that,
Yeah.
Jacksonville and the Rams, and again, of course, Jacksonville and the Rams are going to like the same players. I'm sure you saw that Mike Silver article, Rich, where
Yes.
they asked James Gladstone,
Absolutely.
who is the Rams going to take here? It's going to be Terrence Ferguson, and they took tight end, Oregon, Texas, Terrence Ferguson. Anyway, the fact that they were both in on Harvey, and then Denver takes him in the second round, and then they still take a running back in the fourth round, tells you what they think about both the running backs they took and the running backs that they have, or at least probably play Corum. That's a little bit of a puzzle. But anyway, I'm getting to the point. If you're a couch listener, watcher, you know both of us can get long-winded here. Where the secret boom of, I think, this running back class are the 6th and 7th round guys. And I believe, Rich, there's number one, a ton of 6th and 7th round picks that were typical fourth round talents. And I say fourth round because
Yeah.
fourth round is where we say, well, maybe they're not going to become like one of the 5 best running backs in the league, but they can be an entrenched starter for 3-4 years for a team. There's enough talent there, or an entrenched leader of a backfield in touches, maybe a leader of a committee in this age of running back by committee. And it's not just the talents, Rich. It is the situations where you look a year or two down the line and you say, well, who do they have that really is the guy? And you can step through these guys. Devin Neal in New Orleans, Taj Brooks in Cincinnati. You mentioned Tennessee, Khalil Mullings in Tennessee, Damian Martinez in Seattle, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt in Washington, Brashard Smith in Kansas City. I'm sure I'm missing another one or two that you can make an argument for.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can squint and talk yourself into Ollie Gordon a little bit too.
Yeah.
We'll see if Mike. I doubt Mike McDaniel's going to hang around much longer,
Yeah, I think so.
but I mean that's another team. Like when you look at what happened to the Dolphins last year, they fell into this, this restriction based on how teams defended them because you still have the 2 fastest wide receivers on the planet, and you're like, why aren't these guys creating any explosive plays? And it's because teams realized, they said, hey, we can play coverage against you and you can't punish us with the run because the 2024 Miami Dolphins couldn't run the football.
Mhm.
So when teams realized that they no longer had to come up and devote another player into the box and you could just play coverage against these 2 outside receivers, they can't beat you at speed because the offensive line can't protect. They can't create lanes in the run game. And you're not going to get punished by playing coverage. That's how Jonnu Smith, the back half of the year, becomes the leading receiver on the team.
Mhm.
That's how
Mhm.
Devin Achane catches 80 passes, right? Like there's a reason when you look at the Miami target distribution, it's not just they targeted those guys more. There's a reason why they targeted those guys more, and they had to. Like there's a whole story to tell yourself. And maybe they looked at Ollie Gordon and said, like, we need a thumper
Yeah.
too. Like we got to have a thumper to try to we got to try to punish some of these teams if they're going to play coverage against us. And like, yeah, so that's like basically in a nutshell, the Miami Dolphins fell apart last year, but
No, you're
we'll
right.
see if like that regime.
Well, so on the flip
Yeah,
side, Rich, on the flip side of my narrative about which offenses are going to be the most improved, you also look at teams more than offenses that could go off a cliff. And I think that we saw the efficiency of Miami's offense go off a cliff last year. You also see that Miami's kind of in a rebuilding mode. They went into the draft with like 3 or 4 glaring needs, one of which being offensive line. Anytime you're using your first round pick on a nose tackle, that's kind of a position you get hemmed into. That's not like high fives
yeah,
in the war room. It's like, well, phew, we've got a guy that can play the nose because we wouldn't pay Calais Campbell. Not that he plays the nose, but you get it. You needed some beef inside. And this is a team that could so severely underperform expectations. Some of these guys like Patrick Paul, Austin Jackson, those are your tackles, that doesn't work out, then Stephen Ross is the kind of owner I think that could just hit. I mean, he didn't want this in the first place anyway. He didn't really want Mike
yeah,
McDaniel and want Tua Tagovailoa anyway. And remember, Tua Tagovailoa, the last time he had a concussion, we had people saying he should retire. So, it's not that difficult to imagine in one play we could go from this, oh, souped up offense trying to bounce back to, well, we know the coach is going to get fired. We know they have to find a new quarterback, maybe even a new GM, and then what does that mean for Devin Achane in the future? What does that mean for Tyreek Hill, probably traded, and so on and so forth. But I think Miami is a team where collapse is possible. But I want to get back to the late round running backs. Even there was another one, Kyle Monin guy, yet another one. Like if you think
Mhm.
the Bears didn't take a running back, not because Ben Johnson actually likes DeAndre Swift more than we think, or he likes Roshan Johnson or something like that. It's that he looked at this running back class, and if they didn't get Ashton Genty, he said, that's fine. I can wait. Because he had a lot of chances to take a player from this running back class. He's like, well, I got to get one of my guys, right, to run the ball. And he waited and got Kyle Monin guy, who's a super, super sound running back. Maybe not. Why is he there in the 7th round? Because he's not athletically gifted, but he's so sound. And that's probably going to appeal. He could play a David Montgomery kind of role for the Bears. So I'll ask you, who stands out though? Because the reality is, and you're late in your rookie drafts or late in your redraft leagues or your late dart and best ball, like the best ball million contests, these are exactly the kind of guys that you could look back and say, I scored really high because I spent a 20th round pick on Krosky Merritt and he takes the backfield over, or Monin guy, or any number of these guys we've mentioned, Rich, even Jordan James, throw him in there too. Who's your guy?
Yeah, I think a handful of those guys. I mean, I think just from a team stance, because I think, well, the best player I believe out of that group is Devin Neal. But the problem is year one, like the Saints could just be, this might not be good down in your neck of the woods
Oh God,
this
it's going to
year.
be horrible. Tyler Shuck, is he even a real person?
That's the that's my one problem, because Devin Neal, like, I think he just does everything so well. He doesn't do anything like where it's like explosive. It's just that he does everything so just fundamentally well. He's such a patient runner. He can catch the ball in the backfield. He can be used in pass protection. He lands in a spot where the lead back is 30 and hasn't played a full season since 2017. Like, it was all setting up, right? And then, and granted, like, it's Derek Carr, and I know people have this, like, we know what Derek Carr is. Like, you're not going to Super Bowl Derek Carr. I mean, to look at the Saints with and without Derek Carr last year, they were an inoperable offense, and some of that goes beyond some of the injuries that happened outside of Derek Carr. That, Spencer Rattler and the one game of Jake Haener starting were thrown into. But like, this is a roster that's still just not very. It's not good enough to support a guy like Tyler Shuck. It just
No.
really. I'd be really shocked, and granted, I hope I walk back in this. I want as many good players in the NFL as possible.
Right,
That's not
right.
my thing. I don't want Tyler Shuck to fail. I just don't believe that this roster is good enough to
No.
turn Tyler Shuck into, like, and he's going to elevate these pieces around. I just don't think that the marriage is good enough. But I do think Devin Neal has like that very poor man's, like, Le'Veon
Mm-hmm.
Bell type qualities to him. Like, he's like we're Le'Veon was never fun. Like, he was fun from a tackle break stance, but like, he wasn't fast. He wasn't super athletic. Like, and Neal has like a lot of those qualities. He can catch the ball. I think the guy that stands out to me, as you brought him up, is Ja'Cory
Yeah.
Krosky Merritt, because the team he went to, it's going to be a competitive team. We know they're going to score points. If his road to clear Brian Robinson Jr., who was losing kind of favor with the coaching staff towards the end of the season already. Yeah, he had fumble issues to close the year. He had performance issues the back half of the year. He really didn't play good football the back half of the year. He's in a contract year. Like, then you've got Austin Eckler, who they just had kind of a role for him. He was thrown into a couple games that Brian Robinson missed, and he ended up getting injured too when they extended that role, an older back. So I look at Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, and he has kind of the marriage of everything you look for in a late round pick. Like, yeah, he could theoretically be a zero too, but if he runs into a situation where it's not just opportunity, it's the opportunity paired with like upside, like true upside. He has that. You can talk yourself into guys like Brashard Smith and Jordan James as well, in that same bucket. But I think Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, and even Taj Brooks too. But we'll have to see what happens there with the Bengals, like what the end of the final roster looks like. I don't know what they're doing with Zach Moss, right? Does
He
anyone know?
reduced
Like,
it.
is he going
Yeah.
to
Well,
play?
they reduced his salary. So it's kind of like they expect him to be on the roster, but at a pretty low price. And who knows what he can contribute. So you're right.
Because he's a wild card, like, even if he's cheap, like, because he does things that, like, coaching staffs value.
Right.
Because it's the reason why Chase Brown was roadblocked for 8 weeks, to like our dismay. We're like, because then you see a play like when they played early in the season, they played Carolina, I believe, and Zach Moss has a play where Joe Burrow's in like basically a scramble drill. He makes pressure. Zach Moss comes and just cleans up like a defensive end. And like those are things like when they watch in the film room, like they're like, yeah, Zach Moss is getting a bunch of attaboys and pats on his back because that's like what he does. And so like if Zach Moss is still hanging around, like don't think that he can't carve into like still having some type of like pass blocking role or something
Right.
still, because that exists in the range of outcomes. So I do want to see at that roster, but Taj Brooks is another one of those guys that you look at. Those are that's the group of guys though, because you want to look at it's not just these guys getting the opportunity. It's like, well, where can the upside be if they get that opportunity? Because that's why I look at like a guy like Devin Neal. I'm like, damn it, even if he starts a couple games, like it's probably just gonna be like volume based
Right.
production
Swamp.
because the offense just probably is not gonna be good enough.
Yeah, he's slogging through a Louisiana swamp in terms of this
I
offense.
don't think I'm gonna draft any Saints players in redraft. I gotta be
Well,
honest.
Alvin Kamara is still like what, a 5th round pick, 6th round pick. So it's more like the Saints skepticism is more than priced in because Alvin Kamara is like a
Yeah.
was
Well, Lave is like wide receiver 34
yeah,
too,
I
but
mean, Olave I can see moving on from because it's specifically the passing efficiency that's going to be bad. But the thing
yes.
is, much like Johnny Smith, like you mentioned, I call them the struggle target, Rich. Like there's players that
Yeah.
it's not good when they're getting 12 targets, right? That means the offense is nothing else is really working. But in fantasy, points all counts the same. I mean, if Alvin
Hey, they all
Kamara,
stack.
yeah, I mean, if Alvin Kamara gets 70 total yards but 8 receptions, that's still 15 points, even I mean, it's in a PPR league. But anyway, you're right
Mhm.
to look at the Saints as a potential catastrophic collapse team, this is why it's difficult. Brooks, I think if Chase Brown goes down, we should be really interested in him. And you mentioned the stuff about Zach Moss potentially putting a little bit of a kink in the Chase Brown outlook, but Chase Brown's fallen to the 3rd round. So there's skepticism anyway. Like I'll take Chase Brown probably over Devin Achane on our discussion about the potential collapse. We're looking at environments, but the two guys that we
Yeah.
talked about that I want to really, I'll emphasize Krosky Merritt again, and I want to emphasize Brashard Smith. And I want to emphasize these two guys because it could be just as simple, Rich, as in training camp when the coaches watch these 4 backs for each team go through drills. Like just imagine do the mental exercise out there. Like watch Elijah Mitchell go through a drill if he's healthy enough to stay on the field. Watch Kareem Hunt. Watch Isaiah Pacheco. Go watch Brashard Smith at SMU if you haven't seen him, and then picture him. Similarly, because these guys are electric. Brashard Smith and Jacory Krosky Merritt are just electric young legs, a lot of juice. So again, love Austin Eckler. I mean, but the concussions and his role's limited. Brian Robinson, we heard a lot of buzz that he was falling out of favor. Chris Rodriguez has a place in the NFL, but if you watch Krosky Merritt and his feet and his curvilinear movement, there's a Matt Waldman shout out for you. I could imagine these teams, especially if they're assignment sound, and you're right to bring up that catnip. That's catnip for coaches, just assignment sound running backs. That's why I think people need to
Yeah.
tap the brakes on Amari and Hampton just going like 300 carries or something, because Najee Harris doesn't do a lot that we love in fantasy, but coaches like him. And
Oh yeah.
Amari Hampton is going to have to really be perfect and add all this explosive plays that Najee Harris didn't to really take over that backfield. So it's always something we got to factor in. But
Yeah, there's always those guys that are, and they're always, it's funny, they're always attached to someone that we find so sexy, right? Like
mhm,
David Montgomery is that
mhm,
dude too. Like, they're always attached to someone super sexy.
yeah,
We saw with Raheem Mostert 2 years ago, 2 years ago, and then it's like, yeah, listen, these guys are gonna find the field. They find it happens all the time.
yeah, and
Yeah.
until the younger back really proves that they can be trusted in all these situations. And but I do think bringing up David Montgomery is a moment to pause and say, let's remember though that backfields can give us 2 running backs
Yes.
that we can play every week. I mean, if it's good enough, we'll see how some of these offenses shake out.
Especially
Yeah,
now.
yeah, absolutely.
Because, even though we've got the 17th game and, we don't have as many 300 touchbacks as we used to still, even with the extra game. And because, 12 years ago, guys like Jameer Gibbs and David Achane, like you would be like foolhardy to take those guys in the
Hmm.
first, second round
Hmm.
because you're like, why am I going to take guys to get 225 touches? Now those guys have been propped up by the era of the NFL. You're just like, yeah, that's why we talked about valuing Travion Henderson more than as a prospect, even if he never, out of the box, because a lot of people are like, oh, he landed a spot with Ramondre Stevenson. It's like, yeah, it's perfect. Like he's gonna
Mhm.
just do Trevion Henderson things like immediately.
Yeah.
He's all that pressure is not going to be on him. Like, yeah, would we have loved him to go to the Broncos? Absolutely, but like it wasn't detrimental that he landed in a spot either, because now that type of back that can have 175 to 250 touches, but they're electric plays and they're catching the football. That back has been propped up now in fantasy to be an RB1 when, like I said, a decade ago, those players weren't
Yeah,
RB1s.
even just like the body type, right? I mean, just the mold of running back. But thinking about how these running backs end up fitting in to their offenses in year one, and sort of flipping a topic we just talked about, because you brought up Travion Henderson. Travion Henderson and Cam Scattaboo are interesting because they could get vaulted forward in a short term, like just looking at 2025 way, because of unreliability. Is that a word? I think I just made up a word, of Ramondre Stevenson with the fumbles and Tyrone Tracy with the fumbles, right? Like last we saw
Mm-hmm.
Ramondre Stevenson and Tyrone Tracy, they were kind of losing the trust, wearing out their welcome with their coaches. And there has been a coaching change with the Patriots, but they spent a hot pick on a running back. So even though they signed Ramondre Stevenson to a pretty big extension going into the season, by the end of the season, things change. So that's going to be interesting to watch too. Is there a fumble issue that then changes and flips these backfield, and all of a sudden the rookie, well, you haven't let us down repeatedly yet. So let's see what you can do. What else is on your mind? We got like 10 more minutes before we go off the rails, Rich. What I mean, with the draft or other things, because we're absorbing the draft, we're absorbing the NFL, we're absorbing what everybody else thinks. It's going to be schedule release today. I'm dating the show. We don't have that yet. It's fun. Another point on the calendar is all this stuff is coalescing, and we're getting ready to make our tidal wave of content in 2025. What's
Absolutely. That's the way to say
Yeah.
it. It's you've seen it because most of these dynasty rookie drafts now have wrapped up. We're like over 2 weeks away from the NFL draft. We still have one going on that you and I
Mhm.
are in. That's just wrapping up. But the schedule release, and everyone's gonna have like their eye on the prize now in 2025, like how we're building out rosters and shaping things up. That's always a big deal for us. I work for Warren. We have
Mhm.
the book coming out. The 2025 preview now. So like the schedule release is always a big deal. That's like his, he always goes into the weeds and like the rest and the travel. He's always been at the forefront of that. I do think that ties into one offense though that I think falls under the umbrella of all the things we've talked about, but that is supremely underpriced
Mm.
to open these drafts. And uh, I think it's fair to question this team big picture if their Super Bowl window has closed, but I don't think it falls on the offensive end. I think this offense is going to be really good, and it's the San Francisco
Ooh.
49ers. They're just so mispriced. And I think it starts at Christian McCaffrey still too. Like you're able to get you talked about taking Ashton Jainty, like, potentially as a top 8 pick. You're able to get Christian McCaffrey, who is the still best fantasy football player when he plays football now at the 1-2 turn in fantasy drafts with insulation. Last year, you were already drafting an injured Christian McCaffrey, which he broke a rule. You broke a rule of fantasy football if you took him there because, don't draft players that are already injured. Um, but the allure that the reason gamers still talk themselves into taking him is because why? He's the best damn fantasy football player when he plays.
Mhm.
Even in his small sample last year, 88% of the snaps played, 67% of the rushing attempts, 20% of the team targets, all 100% inside the 5, 100% 2-minute drill. Like in a Shanahan offense, this offense ran 60 total plays with everyone on the field last year. Brock Purdy, Brandon Ayuk, Debo Samuel, George Kittle. Debo's now been traded, but like we're now have Juwan Jennings established himself as a player that took a jump last year. You're getting Ricky Pearsall in year 2. Brandon Ayuk theoretically is going to be 100% at some point this season. This is an offense that's going to bounce back. I have no doubt about it. And then especially when you put the marriage of, we already know this team has the number 1 projected ET schedule in the NFL. And why that matters is if you look at the projections of schedules the way we do them at Sharp Football is based on, projected team wins in terms of Vegas lines. Now, from a blanket stance, it's still a lot of volatility if you're looking at just like pure correlation, but we are very good at diagnosing teams with easy rosters. And that inherently makes sense, right? Because why? We're a lot better at telling you who's going to be bad in the
Yeah.
NFL than who's going to be good, because the NFL has a lot of fragility. If we're projecting a team for 10 wins, they might have, like, think like the Rams after they won the Super Bowl. Well, if the entire offensive line gets hurt and the quarterback gets hurt, like, there's just a lot more fragility, but it's a lot harder to completely punch up in the NFL if we think your roster sucks, right? So we're a lot better. So teams that have top 10 NFL schedules, which are easiest schedules because again, they're based on, projecting teams that are going to be bad. We are very good in terms of correlating those into the end of season results. It's like just under 50%. Like if you're like, an R squared guy. Well, the 49ers have by far the easiest schedule in the NFL. They have they face no teams this season projected to win more than 10 games this year. They face 10 opponents that are projected that have Vegas line totals of 7.5 wins or less. That's not the end all be all, but it's a cherry on top because when you look at the 49ers, also, this is a team we know, like I said, just is going to have injury regression.
Mm-hmm.
They were fourth in the NFL in expected touchdowns scored last year, and they finished 12th in actual TDs. The red zone offense kind of fell off a cliff last year, and a lot of that had to do with, the loss of Christian McCaffrey, right? Like in that offense. So the 49ers, I look at top down. You brought up George Kittle and his gap between the top two tight ends in ADP. No one knows what to do with the receivers. I think I want to draft all three of these guys. I definitely think there's going to be a value of the three. I'm kind of just drafting them all. More interested in these best ball rosters in Ayuk because I don't care about him having a slow start. You're able to draft him as a bench player right now. It'd be different if you were drafting him at a higher ADP. I also think we could see Brandon Ayuk climb in ADP if we just continue to get positive, information on him this summer. But I mean, Christian McCaffrey now, I keep going back to him though. You can insulate Christian McCaffrey. You can draft Puka Nacua and Christian McCaffrey on the
Right,
same
right.
team in fantasy football this year. You can draft Brian Thomas Jr. and Christian McCaffrey on the same team this year. It is absolutely nuts to me. And I get it. You're going to say, all right, I'm going to draft a guy that's been hurt. And Christian McCaffrey has had time where it's largely being priced in, I think, at this point, because we want to win our leagues. We want to win the league. Christian McCaffrey at the 1-2 turn he's a bona fide league winner at that ADP.
Yes, especially in those big best ball contests where you don't just need to be number one out of 12, you need to be number one out of hundreds or thousands. And yeah, if he hits at that price, I mean, I think that he's a perfect Rorschach ink blot of, like you said, just on its face. As long as he's playing, he's going to be a top 3 PPR fantasy running back. And if he plays well and the 49ers play well, I think, can Trent Williams stay healthy? That's a big part of it. Then now he could be the most valuable player in fantasy football again. However, last year, I mean, we had my Achilles is sore. Both my Achilles are sore. Both my Achilles are sore, and I'm not sure what to do. I'm flying to Germany or whatever. And then, okay, I'm well enough to play. And not outstanding stellar usage, yes. Production, now, granted, it was a rocky season for the 49ers. And then another injury, and that's it. And I guess the reality is, you just probably take Jordan James and Isaac Correndo late, insulate yourself, see what happens. And the schedule, by the way, since to put a point on it, they're going to face the AFC South and NFC South. And they're going to face outside of those their division and those divisions, the Bears, the Giants, and the Browns. So yeah, that's what a favorable schedule looks like.
And they had the inverse of what happened to the Miami Dolphins last year. So if you look at what happened to the 49ers last year without Christian McCaffrey, team said, we dare you to try to run the football on us. They played the most coverage. If you look at the amount of middle of the field open snaps, right, which is like the too high safety stuff, right? Brock Purdy, absolutely without Christian McCaffrey, had by far his highest rate. It spiked up. He had over 50% of his dropbacks for the first time in his career with the middle of the field open because teams said, hey, you don't have Christian McCaffrey, you're not going to punish us. Well, they were able to have a good enough run game with Jordan Mason, and then when Garendo took over for that little stint, that it still forced teams to kind of, respect the run game more than Miami offense did. And the other thing that happened is the 49ers were still able to throw the football downfield against those fronts where Miami couldn't. Brock Purdy still had a lot of success. Well, now whether you want to take the stance of it, scheme or
Mm-hmm.
players, surrounding talent, whatever, it doesn't matter. He was by far the most successful quarterback on throws over 10 yards downfield last year. It just was. Those are facts. So like they were able to kind of work around that, and that just gives you a little bit more bonus points of saying, yeah, if this offense just has a little bit better luck on the injury front, like paired with the schedule, like they're going to be back to scoring points this year.
Yeah, and you mentioned
Now defensively. And they might not stop anyone either, so we might get the
Even
bonanza.
better, right? Right. We will see. I mean, that was where they went on defense. Was their draft? Their draft was saying like, yeah, we know we
Yes.
need to improve on defense. Robert Saleh's back. That could be a good thing. It could be maybe not really that big of a thing in either direction. And you mentioned real quick. I'll touch on this before we go off the rails. Pearsall and Jennings and Ayuk. And like you said, Ayuk is more like best ball because he's going to start slow. So which one of those guys can
Yeah.
come out of the gate fast? I mean, there's a good case for both of them. Juwan Jennings at times was the apple of Brock Purdy's eye. And he reminds me of Brandon Marshall. Like the player he's turned into in the NFL is in that Brandon Marshall mold where it's like just put it around him somewhere. He's going to physically dominate the catch space. He's just a
He's
tough
gonna get
customer.
paid after this year, I think.
He is. They what a great deal. What they get him like 2 years, 13 million or something like that. And then Ricky Pearsall, well, once we all tuned out on the 49ers, he really came alive. And he got shot last year. He got shot before the
He had a
season.
hamstring injury and got shot.
Yeah. So I mean, those are things that normally would doom a rookie season at wide receiver. Because with Roman Wilson, I mean, we could talk. We didn't mention George Pickens. I don't know. We could talk about whatever. But with Roman Wilson, what did Mike Tomlin say? It's hard to get on a moving train, right? But Ricky Pearsall jumped on that moving train just fine. By the time then the season was over, he was able to like have a little everything set up in the train that he needed to get across the country. So yeah, this is Pearsall, Jennings. These guys are like 6th round picks, and right away, like it won't be surprising to see one of them be a top 10 wide receiver until Ayuk is fully back up to speed. And I really wondered with Brock Purdy whether the chemistry he's building with Jennings and Pearsall is going to eclipse Ayuk. I mean, they're paying Ayuk, but that doesn't mean Purdy has to choose him over those guys. And Ayuk can just be a player that is more of a decoy, like Sammy Watkins used to be. Sammy Watkins was a high played player, didn't always show up in his production. Anyway, what always shows up in your production fantasy, Rich Hribar, and Warren Sharp, and the Warren Sharp encyclopedia, the whatever I can't remember what he calls it, but it's like an encyclopedia,
It's just the
the
preview book.
preview book, but
The
it's
2025
so
preview
dense
book.
with information. So as some of you picked up on, we got to hang out. Rich and I got to hang out for Super Bowl along with Chris Allen, Justin Edwards, and Ian Harditz. Awesome time as they came down here to New Orleans. Holler at me if you're coming to New Orleans, folks. I love to give the New Orleans. I'm like the ambassador of the city. I love it so much. But we also talking as we're getting older. We talk about raising middle school kids and health, right? As we're getting older, and a lot of things have changed. But I think and hope, and I'm late to the party. So my reveal here is that and I've been taking anti-anxiety medication for like 2+ months or so, a little bit after y'all came for the Super Bowls when I started. And I've just I guess it was because I decided I was going to try something other than denial as a strategy to cope with like things that happened in my life when I was young, or otherwise like not trying to understand why I'm up here at the top level and I'm experiencing my life a certain way, but my head is probably pretty far into my digestive system as it is because I'm thinking about fantasy football. And also you have these patterns or these things that happen. And what's really interesting to me, Rich, is I think we're coming to a new slash old because we're going back to our understanding. I like to say, like, you're not your brain, you're not your body. Like, we're not meat. Like, Rich or Sig or whoever is really something else that's maybe not quite physical. Some might call it a soul or a spirit. And that's our consciousness. That's where our experience comes in. But our bodies are communicating with us, our minds are communicating with us, sometimes skewing our experiences, and things can happen. Like for me, just understanding that my anxiety system, my fight or flight was just firing all the time, so it seemed normal. And then as soon as I tried what it would be like if that wasn't firing all the time, well, now I have a lot more to think about. But I know you had about in your life that sent you on a health journey. It's very similar to what happened with my wife. It's something called MCAS, but it manifests as like an event, an unexplainable event, because it happened the same for both of you, where there's an event and you're like, uh-oh, some stuff I thought that was solid isn't so solid now. Now what do you do? So I just, I think it's good that we're all becoming more conscious and there's a lot more ways to understand what's happening to us. What has that journey been like for you?
Yeah, it's a hashtag getting old. You think I moved through. I moved through my invincible years, right? Where you think you don't, you just don't. It's just not on the forefront, right, of your mind. Like we all know that we're capable of. We know there's an end date, right? There's an expiration date for all of us. We know that we don't. None of us are going to be immortal. So, it was kind of being faced with that, head on. I think everyone has a different experience of when they kind of have that happen in their lives, but it was what, 4 years ago. It was at a fantasy football event, or not necessarily a fantasy football event, but it was a Super Bowl for the Roto Grinders party. This is when Cal and Cam still owned Roto Grinders. Great, great, great dudes. Hope they're enjoying their young retirement. But I was with, Josh ADHD, some guys. We were just at a local brewery, and for the first time in my life, I just turned off. Like my body just turned off, just passed out. They thought I had a seizure. I ended up going through, like, first of all, I was in Nashville at the time. They called my wife. They're telling you, hey, come to Nashville. Your husband had a seizure. You got to get on a plane. So she's, well, for 5 hours of her life, just like thinking like the worst thing ever. Like what's kind of situation is she walking into? So uh and then, like, afterwards, so like they don't know what's wrong with me, and it keeps happening to me repeatedly. Like, again, I'm 40 years old and this happens. Never happened in my life. And it's starting to happen, every couple months, every couple weeks. I go out to dinner with a buddy thinking like, hey, it's fine. And it happens, I lose consciousness in his car. Like, he's freaking out because I'm in his car and like I'm not responding to anything. He gets up to the side of the road, has to call like an ambulance to the side of the road. Like, so he's like freaked out, and like there's no rhyme or reason why this happening. I'm going through all these health issues, and they're like, so I go through neurology first because they thought it was seizure related. They took my license for 6 months. Wasn't allowed to drive. Turns out fine, clean bill of health. Like, the one saving grace of all this, when I get to the end of the story, is that all these other things aren't wrong with me.
Mhm.
So, they found out, hey, you have your license back. Well, what's wrong? Hey, your family has history of heart disease, genetics, right? That's got to be it. Go through same thing. I had what was put in called a loop recorder in my chest. So it's like, hey, next time it's to record all your heartbeat and everything. So when it happens again, we'll be able to go in and say like, oh, this happened, and like we'll be able to pinpoint it. All right. So I'm kind of it's one of those things I'm not excited to have happen. Put in my chest, but it's like, all right, hey, if it's going to help us figure something out in the long run, so be it. So then it happens again where I go into, I lose consciousness, and it's like, all right, I'm going to find something out, right? And I go in and they're like, nothing, everything was fine. Like, what? What? And, I never heard, I think I told this to you and your wife, like, I never heard the words practice of medicine so much, like for over
Mhm.
like a 4 year span. Like, they're just like, hey, this is why they call it the practice of medicine. I go through like gastro, like I go through, I'm running through the woodwork of all these things, keeps happening 4 years. It's just on and off. And a nurse at one point says like, hey, have you like checked out, have you gone to, like an allergist? Like, could it be something really there? I get to the allergist, I'm like, shit, I'll try anything at this point.
Mhm.
Whatever. Yeah. I like, hey, I've gone through like 4 years of doing all things like tilt table tests, like all these things that like are basically are torture methods.
Yeah.
And I'm like, sure, I'll try anything. And I get to the allergist, and no lie, within 10 minutes, he's like, you're in the right spot. And he's like, I was like, what? Like, it's like, I've heard this before, I believe it, but yeah. And it turns out, yeah, mast cell activation syndrome is what I have. Basically, like, yeah, my body doesn't produce enough, antihistamines. So it's like that is it. So basically, it's like I'm a walking, like, not like in like an allergies like you would get them, like typically it's like, oh, I'm allergic to pollen or whatever, but like, yeah, my body doesn't produce enough antihistamines, and turn off, just go into anaphylactic shock and turn off. So that's what started. If you saw me like a podcast, and you followed me for years, and you saw that journey of, what's funny is I showed you the picture. It was you and I
Mhm.
on the couch
Mhm.
from 4 years ago. If you saw me go on like this weight loss journey, it was part of like getting my health in order, and as part of this process, that was a big thing. And I arrived 4 years later at having this official diagnosis. But that's kind of what happened to
Yeah.
me. And when I went to New Orleans, and I'm telling you this story, you're like, my wife has
Yeah.
this, and I'm like, no
Yeah.
way, I can't believe it. And it's small world stuff, and then it's It's amazing, kind of. I didn't really get a chance to talk to her in full about life because she's like, "What are you doing like with this in New Orleans?" I'm like, "Well, don't judge me based on this 3-day
Oh
trip to New
no, you're
Orleans.
not. I would
I
judge you
don't do
more. I
this."
would judge you more if you didn't indulge and you had the EpiPen in your pocket. But yeah, and it's almost like a bucket. The way I understand it, it's like a bucket, and a lot of things can add more histamines to your body, and then the thing
Yes.
that tips it over is what tips you over. So you get a lot more interested in what you eat. And I think we're just learning more about our health. Sleep is so important. Hydration is so important. Some exercise, just walk for an hour a day, half an hour a day, just walk. And we've really learned a lot through functional medicine. Functional medicine doctors are looking at the body as systems, interrelated as a whole, and helping us understand these things as we get older, as you said, as we're going to have to understand that. But we are able to do these things. We want to stay on track for you all because we love our audience so much. We love the fantasy football world, the opportunity you've given us that we just get to hang out. I get to hang out with my good friend Rich here for an hour. And this is called work because of you. So thank you for the ability to do that, for the ability to allow us to have our journey, and hopefully our journey in fantasy football and in life can help you with yours. We always want to help you because you're so classy.